Hello, everyone. Good morning. Well, it's morning for me. I'm happy to be doing a YouTube live this morning, and we're going to talk a lot about anxiety. So I would love to just have everyone participate as much as possible, sharing your experiences, asking questions. I really would love for this to be as interactive as possible. So I'm seeing people slowly join in the chat, which is really wonderful. So again, my name is Hailey. I am a registered clinical counselor. I am in the Okanagan in BC. And we're going to talk about anxiety, what it's like in the body, the experiences behind anxiety, why we're anxious, why things pop up the way that they do in our experiences. So feel free to join in and say like, yes, I've experienced anxiety. These are what I'm noticing, what I'm feeling. So I felt anxiety in my life before. It's a very common, sometimes common experience for me. Maybe like a little bit of the performance anxiety right now as it's our first time doing my first time doing a live. So some common symptoms of anxiety that someone could experience would be feeling nervous, maybe some tenseness in the body, having an impending sense of danger or doom, increased heart rate, breathing rapidly, sweating, shaking, trembling, feeling weak and tired, trouble concentrating, thinking about anything else maybe than that presenting worry. So feel free to join in and say, yeah, I've experienced some of these symptoms. So I want to make sure to be cautious here and also make sure we have a bit of a discussion between the difference between stress and anxiety, because I think anxiety has become very much a word that's embedded in the things that we do. Like, I'm so anxious. And we just throw that word around a lot, but there is a main difference between stress and anxiety. So stress is that pressure that we maybe feel in response to a stressor. So, for example, stress could be, say, a student has a test coming up. They may feel stressed about studying, learning the material, being prepared, versus the anxiety, what it might be, is a fear of maybe not doing well on the exam. So, that impending fear or doom or worrying around the grade that they might get. So, I just want to make sure we know that difference, because sometimes we use the word anxiety a little bit loosely. So, let's see here. Everyone's saying hi. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to have you all here. So that's really great in the chat. Um, so why do we get anxious? Has anyone ever thought about that? Like, a lot of the time with clients, I like to really get to know them and figure out like what's going on for them. Why are they feeling anxious? What are their themes of anxiety? Themes of anxiety could be something like social anxiety, so not feeling confident in themselves, fear of judgment of others. We could also have maybe a fear of like going on an airplane. That could be an anxiety thing, a fear of the airplane crashing, even though logically that's a really rare situation. Emotionally, it could feel very severe and intense and something that we're really feeling a lot of anxiety around. Other things could be, we could fear environmental climate disasters, or we could fear having financial fear, even though maybe you feel confident that your paycheck's coming. You may feel a lot of fear and anxiety that you might not be able to pay your bill. And hands up here, if we've ever gone down the anxiety spiral of doom, where we start jumping so far into the future, where maybe we fearful that we can't pay our rent or our mortgage. And then next thing you know, we're envisioning ourselves, unfortunately, without a home. And it jumps so far into the future, into a scenario that isn't quite happening. So I always make sure to clarify with people too, that anxiety is more about the fear of the future, versus like something like depression or low mood is like reminiscing of the past in an unhelpful way. So anxiety really is that, I like to say, it's like a slingshot. It slingshots us so far into the future where everything is not going okay, and we're having all of those body symptoms as a result. So I'm noticing some questions in the chat. So I just want to make sure, I always want to make sure I get all of your questions in. So I'm just going to see I feel like I can usually tie my anxiety to an event, but my husband has the opposite, anxious for no known reason. I think that's a really great point to bring up. So thank you for that. I think like what happens sometimes with anxiety is it creates such an intense emotional experience that we kind of lose touch with what's happening, or we're having a hard time being really honing our awareness of what's going on. And so sometimes the things that could trigger our anxiety are just like a little fleck of something, could be just a little touch of something. So maybe if we're watching a movie and there is a reference to something that we have a little bit of anxiety around, but we're not even really noticing that, it might just get into our mind and spark that anxiety. So my suggestion would be for that is, when we're not feeling super anxious, take some time to reflect, like what are the things that we're fearing? What are the things that are causing us distress, and see if we can kind of hone the awareness of the things that kind of tickle us in the uncomfortable way. And so that we can kind of have a bit more ability to identify the things. If you can identify, that's great, what your triggers are, because then you can start managing those triggers more effectively, whether it might be engaging less with that trigger or doing some more coping skills. And we'll do some coping skill examples at the end of this as well. So I would just say, keep practicing trying to be aware, because 9 times out of 10, there is something that your mind is making an association, a linkage around, that kind of brings into that anxiety state. So there is also a question here saying, is there a difference between experiencing anxiety and having an anxiety disorder? So this is just my opinion, and some of it comes from all of the empirical psychology knowledge, but some of it's just what I've noticed is, like, if we over label anxiety as a disorder, sometimes that can have an unhelpful effect. Therefore, what I mean by that is we can sometimes live up to that disorder title in a very, very unhelpful way. And we almost end up having more of an anxiety experience. So to be diagnosed, and again, I cannot diagnose, but if you want to be diagnosed, you'd have to see someone with a doctorate level education in British Columbia, for example, for this area. but you would have to have persistent symptoms for a period of time in a certain way, versus an anxiety experience sometimes can just happen when something triggers us or something creates fear, intense fear and worrying and body symptoms. There is a difference, but I like to use the words anxiety experience because I do believe that anxiety can be extremely well managed so that you don't have to constantly have that experience and that uncomfortable experience. So I like to use more of the anxiety experience terminology because it's more hopeful, it's more compassionate, it's more understanding to people's experience, that just because you experience anxiety does not mean that you always have to have anxiety and it's something that's just like stuck to you forever. And someone else is saying that, yeah, anxiety definitely does contribute to some health challenges. So that definitely comes up. And the more stress, which is the pressure we may feel in response to a stressor, such as like a test, like in my previous example, or anxiety that we have constantly, does increase the likelihood of having some health challenges. And if we've been really anxious lately, we have no idea where it comes from. I always like doing that little bit of bird's eye view. What's going on in my day-to-day life? What's happening? What are the things that I'm feeling fearful about? And fear is, again, always that of the future, not something maybe that's happening right now. It's maybe even just like the end of the day or tomorrow or weeks or years, months ahead, but it's really that forward thinking approach. So I always tell people, so what are you fearing? And they might give an example of something that they're fearful of. And I'm like, is that happening like today, Tuesday? Or is it happening like in the future? So if it's happening in the future, that does not mean that we're in danger currently. And so therefore it's important to like be able to bring that back to the present moment. Yeah. So wonderful questions, guys. Keep them coming. I love answering those questions. So if we kind of move forward, if Amit, our wonderful tech specialist, could bring up our photo for us around the nervous system. In the body, we have an anxiety response. And the reason we have an anxiety response is, I don't know if you guys, but nowadays, like if you need to get your needs met in our society, our first world, our ability to have things like food and shelters, it's sometimes can be easier to acquire versus way back in the day when we were like cavemen and women and we were kind of fighting it out. Back then, when we were still going through we were still trying to get our basic needs met, we would have to like fight against predators or things that were literally life threatening. And so those life threatening things, we'd have to fight or flight or freeze or fawn to get away from those hurtful, dangerous things. But nowadays, I hit up Superstore, I get the things I need. I don't have to be fearful that like a predator is going to eat me. And so now things that are dangerous are maybe our need to fit in socially, financials, other things that are not necessarily life threatening in the moment, but they are things that we are perceiving as extremely more dangerous. And so we get more anxious and fearful because we are trying to protect ourselves from those things that nowadays that are dangerous to our overall like well-being. So what happens in the nervous system, way back when, is in the autonomic nervous system, we have the two different parts. We have the sympathetic part of the nervous system and the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system. So I hope for everyone that we can be in the parasympathetic part of the nervous system as much as possible. Because when we're in the parasympathetic part of the nervous system, we're digesting, we feel at ease, life's breezy, where our body is regulating, our blood pressure is normal, all of the stuff that we need to be able just to feel really calm, peaceful. We're able to think really critically. We're able to use parts of our brain in a really balanced way. Versus when we are in the sympathetic part of the nervous system, that's when we're in that fight or flight. And what that means is our body goes danger, alert, there is something that's going to hurt us, and we need to prepare to get away from it. So we might have those symptoms of anxiety start to rise. So feel free, guys, to let me know some of the symptoms that you may experience if you've had some anxiety, such as like the beating heart rate. You can't run away from a mammoth, but you can't run away from fear of socially not fitting in if your heart's not beating hard enough to allow your body to get that energy to be able to run away, for example, or the sweating to cool us off. All those kinds of things are what our body starts to produce through that rush of chemicals and adrenaline that give us the ability to fight or flight away from danger. So some other things, definitely part of the sympathetic nervous system would be, for example, like we get this heightened sense of danger where pupils dilate so we can see things more clearly. Or we can have like even more of an enhanced immune system trying to protect ourselves against danger as well. We don't maybe not sleep as well. So you probably are like, that's what I kind of experience when I'm in that anxiety state, is all of those uncomfortable symptoms. But weirdly enough, anxiety does us a little tizzy, and they go, well, this fear of maybe socially not fitting in or fear of finances, they may not be actually life-threatening in that moment, but our body and our mind perceives it as such and therefore gives us that. And it's trying to protect us from that, from doing those things. So it gives us that symptomology to be ready to go. And so, for example, you might think, well, how come it gives us the symptoms if it's not actually happening? It's because if you think about it, if we don't do things, like if we don't engage, we don't participate in life, we're technically safe, which sounds kind of weird. Like, for example, say you're fearing going to a birthday party, and you're fearing this birthday party because there's maybe people that you haven't seen in a while. And we probably have all felt this way recently with being able to move around freely, more freely in the world. So maybe we're fearing social interactions, and maybe we get those symptomology of anxiety prior to, I'm doing this because it's like that heartbeat, it's like that tenseness, right? And so maybe we get that symptomology prior to and thinking about the birthday party, or maybe you're at a store trying to pick out the perfect birthday gift and you're getting really fearful and anxious about it. And it just doesn't quite make sense. But the anxiety is trying to protect us, because if it creates fear, then we're more likely to avoid, we're more likely not to do that thing. And so if we don't go to the birthday party, right, there's no problem because we're not. But that sucks though, because we're not getting to enjoy our ability to be social, be around friends, be around family, all of those wonderful experiences, because our anxiety is creating such a strong symptomology. And so that's why, like, we go back to that coping skill of, wait, is the birthday party today? No. Is the birthday party dangerous? Not life-threatening, could be uncomfortable. And we want to honor those fears because we want to fit in and we want to be kind to those fears. But at the same time, if we start to rationalize a little bit and bring it back to the present instead of so far into the future, we can realize that our experience is a lot more manageable, that we're not in a dangerous space. We can handle things a lot better. Yeah. And someone's saying that they almost feel immobilized. Exactly. That would be a great word to describe it, is because we get so overwhelmed with that symptoms and those feelings that we just get so stuck, and we don't end up doing the things that we really want to be doing because we're so stuck in the fear. And sometimes what happens is when we do anything in the world, or especially with our brains, the more that we do something, the better we are at it. So riding a bike, same thing. The more you ride a bike, the better you're at it. But the more that you avoid something, the more that you don't engage, the easier it is for you to not do the things that you enjoy, like going to the birthday party or taking risks or trying new things, because we're so fearful. And so it's kind of weird, because we almost want to thank our nervous system for keeping us safe, but then go, wait, that's not really nice either, because we're not able to do the things that we want to be doing. So that's some other pieces as well. All right. So again, that's the fight or flight is in the sympathetic part of the nervous system. And we want to try and transition our experience into the parasympathetic nervous system. All right. And the reason I kind of share all of these types of examples and experiences is because I want to really normalize the experience of anxiety. Like, we think like, oh, I'm not good enough, or something's wrong with me, or how could I be having this? Because we think like, oh, it's bad to have anxiety. It's like, well, no, like your nervous system's trying to do the right thing for you and keep you safe. It's just unfortunately getting so twisted in that experience that you don't get to do the things, like I was saying, that you want to be doing. Yeah, definitely. Can't relax. Feel like you have to constantly move because there's so much energy, and all of those hormones and chemicals are just like firing in your brain and your body that are creating so much energy. Definitely. So I would love to pull up my next slide, and I would love to chat a little bit of the window of tolerance. So the reason I love to chat about the window of tolerance is because it really does a great job of normalizing the different spectrums of experience of anxiety that we may have. So I always share this with every client I meet because it kind of creates that awareness of what's happening in the nervous system, what's happening in our experiences. So I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but say you had a great sleep, a great breakfast, you're in a good mood, and you're just feeling like you can tackle the day. And say you park your car and then later you realize you forgot to pay for parking, you get a parking ticket. That parking ticket sucks, right? But you're able to manage it. You're going, oops, my bad. And you're just able to tolerate that experience. It doesn't feel as stressful, as overwhelming because you've had some great wellness prior to, you're feeling good about yourself, you're feeling quite regulated. So what's happening there in this window of tolerance image here is that you're in your window. So the wider the window is, the more that we're able to tolerate. So when the window's nice and big and wide, stressors and things that are upsetting or hurtful, we're able to manage them more effectively because as humans, we are adaptable and that window can fluctuate. And so what we want to try and do when we are in the window is continue to do healthy behaviors that allow us to feel at ease and regulated and feel really balanced. So things that are like that, I said, like a good sleep, good diet, movement. Like if anyone's feeling a lot of anxiety, I hate to admit it to you, exercise. It's wonderful, regulates the body. Also things like deep breathing or things that are enjoyable, social connection, good hobbies. The list could be gone on and on and on. It's just things that are really good for our well-being and our body and our minds that we feel good about. All of those things really, really widen the window. Okay. And so I know that the title of this document says how trauma can affect your window of tolerance. So trauma is a big word that comes up a lot, but it doesn't necessarily mean to be like our stereotypical trauma. It could be really anything that predispositions us to having a more likely of a chance of struggling to regulate and to have a nice big window. So if something like trauma or hurtful experience or a lot of things are not going well, we're not doing a lot of regulatory things, we can get out of our window. Okay. And so if we get out of our window, we can get into a state of dysregulation. And what that means is literally our nervous system is dysregulating. We're not having a smooth experience any longer. We're no longer at the beach. We're into one of two states. So the first state is the anxiety state. It's the volcano state. I like to call it the hot, fiery volcano state. And that's where it's called the hyper arousal. So again, that big, a lot of energy happening. That's where we have the fight or the flight that I was talking about in the sympathetic portion of the nervous system. So you're anxious, you're angry, you're out of control, you're overwhelmed, your body just wants to fight or flight and just really not be part of that experience any longer. And it just takes over and you just become completely flooded with those emotions. So there's a lot of like racing thoughts, really uncomfortable experiences happening there. And so that experience is just a lot, right? So let me know if you've ever experienced that volcano, that hyperarousal state. I know I have. It's not comfortable. It's really an irrational place, right? Because again, the danger is not actually in the same room as us, but we're just really imagining or perceiving that danger that's coming. That could be something that's actually coming, but not actually happening in that present moment. And so when we're in that state, if anyone can guess, what do you think we need? What do you think we need when we're in that volcano state? If anyone knows, well, we need something that is cooling, soothing, relaxing. And so if we're at that heightened state, we need to get back into the window. And so things that are soothing are things such as like breathing. We're calling our body that we can have the ability to soothe, to calm, to be at ease, to regulate, right? And so we need to do things. And what that could look like is different for everyone. So I always say maybe a warm, hot shower or a bath can be really calming, or even just having a glass of water because our body does not really digest as well when we're in a state of anxiety. And that's why we get those tummy aches. If anyone's else had tummy aches or upset stomach when we're anxious or really, really stressed. when we drink a glass of water, we're actually forcing our body to go, wait, I have to digest this. Okay, let me just take a moment and see if we can regulate. Something else that could be really great is like grounding. So ground is exactly what it kind of sounds like. It's to get back to the ground instead of that heightened, really energy state. We want to get back into the window. And so grounding could be noticing the environment. So things that we see, things that we hear, things that we smell, things that we taste, things that we can touch. Because what we're doing is we're getting back into a soothing portion of our body experience and getting back into that window. So we really need that stuff to cool off. Yes, thanks, Amit, to cool off, definitely. Versus sometimes what happens is that state of hyperarousal, that volcano state, it's just too much. It's just way, 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 way too much. And so what happens is sometimes we end up in the hypoarousal state. So that's that blue portion of this document, this diagram here. The hypoarousal state is, again, another form of dysregulation. Hypoarousal is that spacey, zoned out, numb, frozen. Your body just really wants to shut down. Sometimes when there's just too much going on in that high anxiety state, sometimes we zone out. We just can't be present. We can't take it anymore. And so we're really just, even though our body is in that experience, our mind metaphorically, our soul metaphorically, is just really not experiencing. And so time kind of goes missing. We feel a little spacey and numb. And so what's really interesting is that we can fluctuate between those two different states of dysregulation really, really quickly. It doesn't have to be like, oh, days here or hours here. It can be like a few minutes here. Oh my goodness, I went into a state of hyperarousal. It's really overwhelming. It's really too much. And now we're zoning out into that cold, numbed out experience. So that sometimes could be really that depressive low state, that dissociation state. And so that can be that alternate experience. So trick question, but not so trick, is if we are in the hypoarousal state, what do you think, guys, we need to get back into our window? What do we need? If we need to cool off, what do we need to get from the hypoarousal back into the window? So if you think about it, if we're kind of the iceberg stage, right, we need the opposite. We need something activating. We need something energizing. We need something that is going to be really engaging. And so it could be different for everyone, but I always say is like lean on your nervous system in that way. So what you can do is you can do something like exercise, something that's like gets your heart beating a bit more out of that zoned out state. You can also do something like, has anyone ever, I know it sounds really weird, but has anyone ever had a bite of lemon or like lime? I know that sounds really strange, but it's that feeling of like activation. It's like so sour that you can't help but like squeeze up your face. And it really kind of wakes up the nervous system a little bit. Smells are really wonderful. Again, like another somatic experience, something like coffee. Yep. Re-energize, heat up, find safety. Definitely. Yep. Those are all things. Cried out. Sure. Yeah. If you want to expel that negative energy that you're having, definitely. All of those sorts of things will really activate us and get back into the window. Because when we're in the hypoarousal state, that is when we're freezing and we're fawning. We're having the alternate portion of the nervous system activated. And so the reason why I love this so much is because it helps us to maybe clue into the experiences maybe that we're having. And it allows us to realize, like, what do we need at certain times for regulation? So we sometimes need things that are either calming and soothing, or we need things that are activating. And it's so important to recognize like what those things are, because sometimes people will give you a suggestion and you're like, nah, that's not for me. And that's okay, because you need to figure out what resonates with you, what feels good for you, what you enjoy, what works for you. And I always recommend to people is, if possible, is like take this sheet and write out a few things that are either soothing for you or things that are activating. And sometimes you have to think of things that are soothing and activating that we can do over longer periods of time that maybe take a bit more planning or energy, like going for a run or things like that, or something that's quicker to do, like deep breaths, or finding something to smell that's really activating, all of those things. So I see some really great suggestions also in the chat, like Finding something safe, so that's great. Going for a walk. Going for a walk is interesting because you can either have it to be activating because you're really noticing the environment and like the nature and the wonderful fresh air, things like that could be really activating. But taking a walk could also be really soothing because it could be really grounding and mindful and nature based. So that's what I mean about it could go either way. It's just a matter of figuring out for you what's soothing, what's activating to get you back into your window. Let's see here. Yeah, so definitely experiencing your feelings, validating them, those are always important. And I think that's just a really great skill for just keeping you in that window to begin with. So hopefully that's interesting for you guys to utilize, is like this ability of awareness to recognize if you're either in the hyper arousal state, the hypoarousal state, and how to get back into your window, and really aligning it with like why you're having those symptoms that you're having in your body, especially like those anxiety symptoms, and what you need to kind of move forward from that. All right. So I would love to spend some time seeing if anyone has any questions around anxiety. And if not, I would love to move into really a lot of skills around anxiety and things that we could like help us. So does anyone have any questions so far? Feel free to shoot them out. All right. So it would be great if we can move along into our next slide around strategies for overcoming anxiety. And so the reason I love bringing up this image here is because it's important to kind of think like what tools can go into your toolbox to allow you to feel as though you have stuff to do to manage anxiety. So for example, the first one is attention centering techniques. So a lot of you earlier had said like, I feel anxious, but I'm just not sure why. It's like, well, that's fair because maybe you haven't really clued in or it hasn't really become apparent to you like why you're feeling anxious. And so when we do some attention centering techniques, it really forces us to focus on our own experience. If we're just in that heightened flighted state of awareness and anxiety, we're really looking outwardly, we're scanning, we're hypervigilance. But if we bring it back to the body, back to our experience, it allows us to become more at ease and less flooded. So we can do that again by breathing. And breathing is not a sigh. It's nice deep breaths, by the way, everyone, because I always help clients to, I'm like, let's take a deep breath and there's a sigh. I'm like, no, like push that air all the way out. Visualization. So thinking of things that are calm, usually nature is really wonderful. The meditation is focusing on your thoughts and feelings in the body. And it's okay if your mind wanders, but again, just bringing it back. So someone was asking, like, why does it make us seem crazy? I'm assuming it's why does anxiety make us seem crazy? The reason it makes us, I'm just going to assume, I don't know your experience, but the reason why anxiety makes us feel crazy is because we're perceiving a threat or danger that is not actually happening in that moment. So I'm going to try and think of some more examples. For example, we might fear going on an airplane. So we might be really excited to go to our vacation or destination, but we might really fear the airplane because we're worried that the airplane might crash. Can airplanes crash? 100%. How often do airplanes crash? Way less than cars crash. And so that illogical fear that that's going to definitely happen to you makes us feel crazy because we know partially in our mind that it's very unlikely for the airplane to crash and for something bad to happen. But it's that fear of it happening and that symptomology of the fear and anxiety that creates us this and battles partially of that portion of our logic that goes, that discrepancy between the logic and our emotions creates that feeling that we're crazy because it's like, well, we know partially that that's not going to happen, but it feels so real and so true in that fear. And so that's why I always give that suggestion of going like, well, what's happening right now? And what are some tangible ways that we can manage that fear or create safety and security, peacefulness, calmness when we're about to get on the airplane, when we're on the airplane, or things that we can do to allow us to recognize that that fear is not happening. And even once we're on the airplane, are we crashing? No, we're just, it's smooth sailing, right? So that's kind of why we're getting that feeling, but that's why it's so important to not be hurtful towards ourselves and to criticize ourselves for that illogical fear, because the more that we're negative of ourselves and our thoughts, the worse that it will layer. Because if we go like, oh, I can't believe I fear airplanes. That's so silly. That's so stupid. Why am I doing that? Then that just makes it worse. That puts more pressure and strain and stress on us. And so the anxiety symptoms go, wait, hear me. Like, don't you hear me? We're fearful. This is dangerous. Can't you tell that airplanes crash? And of course they crash, but it's not that they crash a lot. And so it's that layering of the emotions and self-criticism that creates even more intense of an experience. I do want to segue just for a minute on as a tangent to that is like, sometimes we have to think about emotions and like why we have emotions. Like, has anyone ever thought like what emotions are or like why we have them? Emotions are just like messages, like in our brain. Emotions are firing and the neurotransmitters are firing just to let us know what's up. So if anyone has a favorite food, like for me, I love ice cream. Okay. So when I eat ice cream, I feel happy. And the reason I feel happy is because I've had wonderful experiences with ice cream, great memories around ice cream. It's nostalgic. It tastes good, so many different options and flavors. And so the reason why I eat ice cream, it tastes good, but I also have an emotional response of joy and happiness and content when I eat ice cream. Those emotions are telling me that I like that. For example, I'm not the biggest fan of like mushrooms. So if I eat mushrooms, I'm not too happy. I'm a little bit grumpy. My grumpy emotions are telling me that I don't like that. The same premise of this emotional dialogue happens for anxiety. Our anxiety is telling us what's up and what's to fear, what's dangerous in the world, what's not okay, how to be aware of the things that are possibly going to be hurtful for us. And so I don't know about you, but often because anxiety is so uncomfortable, anxiety flares up and we look at it and we go, I don't want to feel that. So we push it away. But in reality, what needs to happen is we need to actually feel the anxiety to be able to move through the anxiety. We need to recognize the message it's trying to tell us and then cope effectively with it. So that's really, really important to recognize is that we can't just push away the anxiety. We have to feel our feelings, ironically, grammatically, feel as in feelings. And so we need to feel that anxiety to understand like what it's trying to tell us, because it will keep festering unless we hear it and regulate with it and acknowledge it and then cope with it. So some other comments here is I have a fear of fainting. Yeah. You know what? That's a great thing to bring up because when we're fearful of something happening, especially like a body symptom, if we fear it, it builds. So what that means is that if we have a fear of fainting and then we think about it and we fear it even more and we ruminate. And so ruminate means is when we have a lot of constant thoughts and we're thinking about it around and around and around it goes, it creates even more of a perceived threat or fear. Because if you faint, yes, it's very uncomfortable, but you will not like die from it. Like it's not going to be the end of everything, but we feel it as so, and our body doesn't want us to faint. We don't want to hit our head on the way down or whatever it is. But that layering of fear creates a fear to escalate even more. So sometimes we have to even think about it logically, like, and use that kind of coping skill of, is it something that we truly need to fear? Could we look at it differently? How can I actually bring my body back into the parasympathetic portion of the nervous system? Because fainting is a part of the freeze and fawn response, right? It makes us freeze and play dead so that the mammoth wouldn't eat us way back when, but nowadays it's trying to protect us from whatever else is going on. So definitely. So if we, even with like a panic attack, for example, the reason why panic attacks kind of increase and are so uncomfortable is as we're starting to have a little bit of feelings around panic, if we think about it, then it creates more and more fear. And so then we end up escalating in more and more fear until we actually get to the panic attack. A panic attack doesn't just happen like just that. If you actually break it down second by second, you realize that there's thoughts and feelings that are layering onto the fear that results in that panic attack. What about if you can't pinpoint what you fear or is making you anxious? I think this is a really great question that was brought up earlier. I think that maybe it's just you haven't honed your awareness to understand like what is it, but I don't know, like as society, we're always such go-getters and like trying to always get things done or do our life. And I think it's a portion of us slowing down and going like, what's important to me in this world? What do I value? But also like, what are the things on my plate that I'm fearful of? Like what things cause me stress, and really a deep reflection overall. I think that's why counseling is so wonderful, because it forces you to really look inward about your life and what's going on. Are your needs met? Are the relationships in your life meeting your needs? Is your job happy? Do you have a good home? Like all of those things. So sometimes we're anxious without even really acknowledging it. And so it feels as though we don't know why we're anxious. But if we're able to really take that bird's eye view and step back and have an understanding of all the things that shrink our window, right? Then we can realize that it might just not be one thing. It could be a collection of things that are shrinking our window of tolerance. What if you have a feeling of fear and you stop and think what you have been triggered at, write it down, keep a journal? Yeah, definitely. I think that would be a wonderful skill, because the more that you have awareness for what you're experiencing, what you're feeling, what you're thinking about, the more likely you're going to have an ability to notice the themes of your anxiety. So I'll do an example. So sometimes someone will come. I work with a lot of people with anxiety. This is my jam, the anxiety stuff. So someone will come and go, I have a fear of large crowds. I don't like going to the grocery store. I fear the birthday party. I have a hard time looking at myself in the mirror. And I go, okay, so there's a lot of anxiety, and these all are different like social settings. And I realize that there's this theme of social. So then we start to realize, it sounds as though like a lot of your anxiety is that social theme. And so even though in the moment you may not realize that, the more that you acknowledge your triggers, things that poke you and create that anxiety response, right? The more that you're going to have an ability to recognize like what your theme is. And the good thing about finding a theme for anxiety is generally then certain coping skills are going to be more effective for you. So such as like self-compassion, positive self-talk. Check out Barb's lives on all of that. Those are really wonderful skills there. Things that are going to really help you to feel confident in who you are, feeling like you don't have to fear that social theme. Another question is, when should someone take the next step to see if medication is needed from them? Okay, so don't you love it when a therapist answers a question without answering a question? I'm going to do that right now. I'll give you a metaphor. So as a clinician, sometimes I meet clients and they are in an experience that's really uncomfortable for them. And so what I metaphorically see them is at the bottom of a hole, and down there, they're at a hole and they're trying to do things to get them out of that hole. And so I might be reaching down to grab them, and I might be throwing down a ladder, and each rung of that ladder is a different coping skill: exercise, deep breathing, social connection, meditation. The list is endless, right? Sometimes, though, that person may not be able to reach that ladder. No matter what's happening, they can't reach that ladder. They can't grab onto that coping skills and healthy behavior ladder. And so that might be the moment when someone might need the medication. Again, might, it's neither a yes or a no, and there's no clear answer as to when. That's why it's a personal choice. But sometimes when that medication is taken, it's just that step stool so that person can grab onto that ladder, start climbing up those rungs, start practicing the healthy behaviors, the things that they need to feel well. And as they go up that ladder, if eventually down the road they decide, you know what, I'm doing really well, I'm ready to decrease my dose of medication or remove myself off that medication, then they might fall down a couple rungs on the ladder as an adjustment to not being on the medication. But the key there is they're still on that ladder and they're still using those healthy behaviors to regulate. So in my personal opinion, I am more of a person that goes, what are all the things that we can do and try to help you to feel regulated and balanced before medication? Not that there's anything wrong with medication. It's just that I think that if you can find a way, your recipe for wellness, your recipe for regulation, I think that's going to feel really empowering to go, wow, like I can control my emotions. I can manage my emotions. I can live a pleasant life, feel really good about things. So that's my answer without answering. It depends, but I would really ask yourself, like, am I willing to try all of the healthy behaviors first? And maybe that's the question that needs to be asked. Let's see here. Let's look at some of the other questions. You guys are great. I love all the questions. Okay. So someone's saying that like sometimes the anxiety is great. And then sometimes it's not present, it's not really affecting them. But then over time, it starts to get worse. Definitely. That's why I really wanted to talk about the window of tolerance today, is because the more awareness you have for what's causes stress for you or discomfort, the more capable you are of regulating. So maybe at that time when your anxiety was not really present, do you like, maybe that's what you need at that time to feel well. Maybe those are the aspects. Maybe you were doing something more frequently at that time that was really helpful. So that's why it's like really, again, the awareness of things that you need. And if going back to that original question of, is it an anxiety experience or is it an anxiety disorder? Well, if you think about it, like an anxiety disorder is diagnosed by what a client reports and what's observed. So if a client reports no symptoms of anxiety and is observable, very calm and at ease and things are going well, do they have anxiety? It's like, well, just because you had it in the past doesn't mean that you're actually having it currently. That's why I like more of the anxiety experience as it comes and goes in different seasons of changes of life. All right, let's see if some other questions here. So the more things you take on, the less tolerance we have because we're humans. We all have limitations and that's normal. So we can only do so much. So people are making some really great comments that as the more that they take on, the more anxiety they may have. So wonderful. All right. So if we go back to the image of the 4 core strategies for managing anxiety, we were talking about the attention centering techniques. So those would be really wonderful. The visualization, the breathing, the meditation, those are really great for bringing that awareness back to self because we're thinking about what's happening with self, what's happening right now. We're not like catapulted like so far into the future where everything is bad and anxiety is happening. So the second one there is expressive, creative strategies. So that would be to channel anxious thoughts or feelings in a more productive way. We might identify specific outlets to express creativity, such as working on a project, drawing, or athletics. So, for example, art therapy is great, or gardening, because gardening is very much grounded, it's mindful, it's present. You're creating plants and expression of plants and things that you like. Art is great because you're able to maybe draw a picture to represent what you're feeling, because sometimes that feeling is so powerful. Like we're talking about how it makes us feel a little bit crazy and things like that, but we can express ourselves in a way without being judged for those feelings. So art may be great. Physical movement, huge. Like if I were to say, like, this is just my opinion and it may not work for everyone and there's no shame in medication whatsoever. But if you were like, should I take medication or should I exercise 3 times a week for 30 minutes? I would tell you to exercise because exercise regulates the neurotransmitters. And that's what I mean about like, can you try all of the different healthy behaviors prior to a medication? So not that you shouldn't take it and not that it's bad, but it's just like, those are the things that us as biological human creatures, we need. Because if you look at the evolution of the brain, they always identify like the core portion of the brain is the lizard brain. And the reason is, I don't know if anyone's ever seen a lizard, but they're kind of scattered. They kind of dart here and there. They're so quick. They're seeking sun and warmth and basic needs. So if you look at this is my metaphor of the brain, my hand. So the brain, this is the inner part of the brain. And then the brain stem, that portion is responsible for the survival, right? And so with the lizard brain, like we need to have that ability to like exercise. Those are the things that regulate us. And over time, more of the brain developed. And my large pointer finger here is my juicy prefrontal cortex. That's where we have our like thoughts and critical thinking and everything happens. But sometimes we overthink things and that gets overactivated. But if we get back to the basics of our lizard brain and that we just need basic needs, we'll get a lot more regulated. We'll feel a lot more well. So that's why we do a lot of the that's why exercise is so important. And I also just want to clarify, like exercise could just be a walk. Nobody needs to go crazy for weightlifting. If they want to, great. But like, it doesn't have to be too strenuous. It just has to be a little bit of movement, a little bit of a heart increase. It could be anything, yoga, the list goes on. Wonderful. So just checking in with the questions here. It's so hard to fit in time for yourself, but I'm going to be a little harsh for a moment. I think when people say, this is just my opinion, it's a little harsh, but my opinion is that when people go, well, how do I make time for it? It's like a little bit of creativity and its priority. Like if you're feeling an overall sense of anxiety, your body is telling you that it needs it. It needs wellness. It needs good behaviors. And it's just it's that signal again that tells we like ice cream, but it's also telling you that you need that biological wellness or those coping skills or that sense of goodness. Because if our buckets aren't full of our own wellness, we can't do other things. We can't work. We can't be a family member. We can't hold relationships because it becomes so overwhelming. So that's my little bit of harshness for a moment, because it's hard to find the time, and I validate that, but it goes, how can we be creative? Maybe it's like going for a walk with a friend, social time, exercise, 2-in-1 deal. So that could be another thing as well. Yeah. So this one person is asking, says that they're very healthy, and someone unfortunately told them that if they were to be hit by another car, they would possibly die. That's true. You could definitely that happen. And now there's a fear of on the freeway. So I'm going to use this example and twist it a little bit. I hope you don't mind, just to kind of give some information. Our minds work by learning. And what that means is that when we move forward in life, we either learn something helpful or we learn something unhelpful. And so every experience we ever have, we need to learn something. And when we learn something, we make an association. So for example, if I were to say red light, well, you go, what's a red light? Someone might think, oh, that means like a red light means like the red light when we're driving our car. Some people might say a stop sign. Some people say a red light might mean danger, right? But in reality, a red light is just a red colored light bulb, right? Like it's not actually meaning anything, but because we've learned it to be and made that association, that link into something, that's how we know what it means. And so if someone were to tell you something that is fear inducing, our brain goes, danger. So we're going to make a link here, and we're going to make a link to be fearful of the thing that could hurt us. And so we've made an unhelpful association because we're going to fear getting into the car, even though we need to drive where we need to go, because not 100% of the time are you going to get hit by a car. Yes, you could get hit by another car, but it does not mean it's going to happen every time. So I think that's why it's important to acknowledge like some of the things that we're learning or associating and why. Okay. And yeah, someone else bringing up this idea is that when we're tired, we might feel really anxious or panicky. Definitely. I think the reason is because when we're tired, guess what happens to our window? Shrinks, right? And so when it shrinks, we're tired, we can't manage. And then if the window's too small and another stressor happens, that's where we jump out of our window into that hyper arousal state. So yeah, so we did the attention centering techniques, expressive creative strategy. And then the other one is the reflection exploration strategies. So this is kind of what we're talking about in terms of the awareness of things. So communication, right? Talking to friends, like, I'm noticing I'm feeling this way and this way. And then they give you feedback, because that feedback loop is really helpful. And like kind of a weird example of that is we've all have probably written like a paper in school or high school or whatever. And when you read out your paper out loud and then you hear it, and then you're able to catch maybe some of the grammatical errors or how it sounds, the reason that changes is because when we either communicate and we hear, we create that feedback loop and we're able to digest information differently. And so when we communicate with others or in therapy, we get that feedback loop and we're able to see things more clearly and learn about things. So that would be a great one for anxiety, is to share your experience and be able to have feedback on it. Self-monitoring. Yeah. When someone was said earlier in the chat about writing down triggers and noticing if there's themes, and writing them down every time it happens. That would be definitely another one as well. And journaling is another feedback loop as well, because when we think something, it's just going around and around and around. If you can, I've been there, I fear it. I'm like, oh no, it's spinning. And so the way that we can unspin that is if we write it out and reread it, then we're creating again that feedback loop as well. Another great way to go through our worries is to do some maybe cognitive challenging. Cognitive just basically means any mental activities are happening in your mind. So that would be thoughts, beliefs, ideas, etc., any of that. So cognitive challenging could be challenging the fear that we may have. So a fear of driving, I'll use that example. So what that would be is, so for example, I'm fearful of getting in a car. We ask why. I'm fearful of getting hit by another car. Okay, great. So there's that fear of getting hit by another car, but we have to go, well, how often does that happen? What is some evidence that I will not get hit by a car? So evidence for that is like putting on your little Sherlock Holmes hat and investigating and going, I'm a good driver. I'm a defensive driver. I'm going to do my best to plan my route out in advance. I'm going to take maybe a quieter road if that helps me to feel more comfortable. And just really challenging and finding evidence that it won't happen, right? And has it happened to me before? And then we also can think like, if I were to get to my destination, how would I feel? I probably feel really great that I was able to make it there. So that can be really soothing as well. And will my worry of getting into the car today matter 5 years from now? Probably not, because it's not going to really be a big impact. And so if we could recognize that this fear isn't actually happening, it won't make a big impact in the future, we may be able to get into the car more effectively. So I'm just checking on some of those questions. It says someone asking like back to the association piece, how do we uncouple that link? Well, the way to uncouple a unhelpful link is number one, have awareness that we have that link. So if we recognize where we got that fear, we can start to challenge it through cognitive questioning. We can manage the fear of that link of doing the expressive creative strategies. We can do the attention centering techniques as the deep breathing, or try and create a new link. Like, how could I see this differently? Like reframing it into a more helpful way. And I think like, yeah, definitely having a therapist is a great way to break that link too, because sometimes our links go way back into childhood. And so having more awareness of where that happened and why would be a great another resource too. And yeah, so those would be some of them. So that would be the exploration strategies around like journaling, communication, monitoring, those kinds of things. And then the last one, again, we kind of already touched on this, would be like the healthy lifestyle values. So healthy lifestyle values, again, are the nutrition, good, helpful, healthy relationships, exercise, good sleep, hydration, nutrition. Like I am a big fan of you are what you eat. If we don't eat well, we're not giving our body the things that we need to survive and to be regulated, because our emotions come from neurotransmitters. If we don't have the right nutrients, then maybe we're not getting the right stuff to build those neurotransmitters in the right way. So those are some really great strategies. And I just feel free to shoot out any more questions if you guys have, but otherwise I would love to kind of maybe end with a little bit of attention centering technique, if you don't mind. I'm going to do it. It's going to be a little funny for me because I'm not with anyone right now, but I'm going to do the little exercise and just see if you guys can maybe follow along if you feel like it. And so I would love for everyone to, if you can, feel free to close your eyes for a moment. And I want you to just see if you can sense into your body. And feel free to take a deep breath if you can. And just notice if you're having any fears of anxiety. I know earlier today I was a little nervous to come on YouTube live today, but just notice if there's any tension in your body, and just start to allow your awareness to sink inward and just feel into your body where you may be noticing any tension or stress, and just acknowledge that area where you may be feeling some stress and tension. And as you do that, I want you to imagine that that stress or tension is energy. And I want you to imagine that that feeling of energy is moving in a circle. And I want you to ask yourself, which direction of that circle is it moving? Is it either moving clockwise or counterclockwise? And either way is fine. And just to yourself, acknowledge which way that energy might be moving. And as you do that, I want you to take a big deep breath. And I want you to see with your mind if you can push it the opposite direction than what you were feeling. And just notice. Good. And with that, you might have noticed that it might have changed a little bit for you, that the more that you notice that energy in your body and how it's moving, and see if you can push it the opposite way, you might notice an unwinding of that. Wonderful. Awesome. Great job, guys. I really appreciate joining you all today. Feel free to put any last minute questions, but hopefully this was helpful. A bit of discussion of what anxiety is, where it's happening in the body, the window of tolerance, some strategies for managing anxiety, some discussion around medication, how to help yourself through some challenging situations, questions around awareness. But yeah, it's been really wonderful to join you all today. Wonderful. Yeah, I see some of you guys saying this really helped. That's really great. I'm so happy. Yeah, I think this is a really great way for us to connect and get some ideas or suggestions and be able to ask questions live. I think that was really wonderful. Awesome. I saw that some of you guys liked the energy spiraling technique of pushing it the opposite way. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Awesome. Helped everyone relax. That's good. I hope you guys feel all easy breezy, calm today. You deserve to feel at ease. You deserve to know that you can manage your emotions, that anxiety does not have to always be happening. Yeah, good. Thank you. Yeah, totally. I love giving lots of information. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Great. Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, guys. Bye. See you next time.